Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking on a stack of sources that are, well, quite honestly, they're heavy.
It is a really heavy stack.
Usually, we might dive into a specific historical event or maybe a new tech trend, but today we're looking at the architecture of reality itself.
We're talking about philosophy, political theory, theology, and really just the very nature of human consciousness.
Which is a lot for one sitting.
It is a lot, but it's incredibly illuminating. When you really dig into these commentaries on these Quranic concepts, you find that they aren't just abstract ideas floating in the clouds.
Right, they're not just academic exercise.
Exactly. They are surprisingly grounded. They offer this blueprint for understanding why societies fail, why people get oppressed, and most importantly, how they can wake up.
And the thing that hooked me right off the bat, before we even get into the heavy political stuff, was a linguistic detail. Yes, a grammar point of all things. The sources point out that in the text, the word for light, which is nur, is
always singular.
Right. It's just one light. But the word for darkness, which is zulumat, is always plural. It's darknesses.
It's a fascinating distinction, isn't it? And the sources argue that this isn't just a poetic choice.
It's not just for rhythm or flow.
No, not at all. It sets the stage for the entire worldview that we are about to explore today.
So let's unpack that for a second. Why would light be singular and darkness be plural? Because my first thought was, well, light is light, but darkness is just the absence of light, right?
In physics, that's true. But in the context of ideology and truth, which is what these sources are dissecting, it's a lot more complex.
How so?
Think of it this way. Truth or reality is cohesive. It doesn't contradict itself. If you have a mathematical truth, say 2 + 2 = 4, that's it.
There's only one right answer.
Exactly. There's one answer. It is a singular path of clarity. The divine law, or the universal principles discussed in these texts, is seen as that singular beam. It cuts right through the confusion.
I see that. It's like a laser beam, coherent and focused.
Precisely. Now, contrast that with error. Contrast that with ignorance or falsehood. How many ways can you get a math problem wrong?
Oh, infinite ways. I could say it's 5 or 10 or 1,000,000.
Right. Darkness is fragmented, it's chaotic. The sources describe Zulumat as this plural entity because there are a million ways to build a system that simply doesn't work.
There are 1,000,000 specific ideologies that lead to oppression.
Yes. You can have a darkness based on greed, a darkness based on racism, nationalism, pure nihilism.
They're all different darknesses.
But they all share the exact same result. They obscure the truth.
That is such a cool mental image. It actually reminds me of, bear with me here,
I'm listening.
a disco ball versus a laser.
A disco ball. Go on.
So the laser is the nur. It's singular, it points in one direction, it's powerful. And the disco ball is the zulumat. It fractures everything. It spins around, it creates these little pockets of shadow and light. It's confusing, it's distracting. And honestly, the disco ball is kind of mesmerizing.
That is actually a brilliant analogy. And the source argues that we, as humans, are often really attracted to that fragmentation.
We like the disco ball.
We like the darknesses because they allow us to pick and choose our reality. If there are multiple darknesses, I can choose the one that suits my ego.
Or the one that makes you feel powerful.
Exactly. But the light is objective. It doesn't care what you want. It just is.
And that objectivity can be scary. Because
Yeah.
if there's only one light, you have to align yourself with it. You can't just bend it to fit your mood for the day.
Correct. And this leads us directly to the mission of this deep dive. The sources we have today are trying to answer a very specific, very painful question.
Which is why societies stagnate.
Yes. Why does the human intellect, which is supposed to be this brilliant tool, we put people on the moon, we split the atom.
We cure diseases.
Right. Why does it fail us so often when it comes to just living together? Why do nations that seem to have everything, wealth, power, technology, sometimes feel like they are just stumbling around in a pitch black room?
It's the paradox of progress. We have better phones, but are we better people?
Exactly.
Are our societies actually more enlightened, or do we just have shinier toys in the dark?
That is the core question. And to answer it, the sources introduce us to a concept that acts as the antagonist of our story. The villain, if you will.
And I love a good villain in a deep dive, because it gives us something concrete to grapple with. This villain has a name, right?
Takat. It's a term that appears frequently in the source text. Now, historically or linguistically, people often translate this as idol or tyrant.
Right, because when I hear idol, I immediately think of Indiana Jones. I think of some golden statue in a dusty temple.
A literal idol.
But we aren't talking about archaeology here. We are talking about political science.
We are. The sources define Taghut as any authority, any system, or any ideology that rebels against or replaces divine law.
So it's not just a statue.
No, it is essentially human-made sovereignty that claims to be the ultimate authority. It's when a human being or a human system looks at the universe and says, I know better than the laws of nature.
Wow.
They say, I know better than the moral laws established by the Creator. I am going to set the rules.
So it's institutionalized arrogance.
Institutionalized arrogance is a perfect way to put it. It's the darkness of human-made systems that confuse us versus the light of universal principles.
And to explain why these human-made systems, this Taghut, lead to disaster, the sources use a really interesting analogy. They talk about a machine.
Yes, the machine analogy. I found this really helpful because abstract political theory can get a little dry.
It really can.
But everyone understands how an engine works, or at least that it has parts that belong in specific places.
Right. So the source defines injustice, and the Arabic word is zulm, correct?
Yes, zulm.
Okay.
And they define it literally as putting a thing where it does not belong. That is the definition. Displacement.
Putting a thing where it does not belong.
Now, imagine a complex machine. Let's say a high-performance car engine. Every piston, every valve, every single gear has a specific place designed by the engineer.
Because the engineer knows how the machine works, they designed it.
Exactly. Now imagine you come along, you, who did not design the engine, and you say, you know what? I don't like where this spark plug is.
Oh, no.
You say, I think it should go in the exhaust pipe, and I think the oil should go in the gas tank.
I have the free will to do that. I can physically move those parts.
You have the freedom to move them. But what happens to the car?
It explodes. Or it just grinds to a halt. It definitely doesn't drive you anywhere.
Exactly. That is Taghut. That is Zulm. The source argues that the universe is a machine, a system designed with specific moral and physical laws.
And when we mess with that design,
When human beings, in their arrogance, decide to rearrange the machine according to their own desires, saying, no, I want the power to be concentrated here.
or I want the wealth to be hoarded over there.
Right. Or I want to redefine what creates a healthy family. They're putting parts where they don't belong.
And so the machine creates friction. It creates heat. It creates smoke. And that smoke is the darkness.
Yes. The darkness isn't just an accident. It is the smoke coming from a broken engine. And the scary part is the person moving the parts often thinks they are improving it.
They think they're doing a good job.
They think, I am modernizing this engine. But because they are ignoring the foundational design principles, they are actually destroying it.
This is where the distinction between a statue and a system becomes really important. Because you can smash a statue. That's easy.
You just knock it over.
But how do you smash a system that has been built into the very fabric of society?
That is much harder. And that brings us to the architecture of darkness. The sources break this Taghut down. It's not just a vague cloud of bad vibes. It has structure.
It has faces.
They identify two main faces of this oppression, the political and the religious.
Let's start with the political face, because I think this seems the most obvious to us. We've all seen dictatorships on the news.
The political face of Taghut is authoritarian rule. It's a system that demands subservience to a human ruler rather than to moral law.
Right.
But here is the nuance. It's not just about a guy being mean or cruel. It's about the source of the law itself. In a Taghut system, justice is subjective.
Justice is whatever the ruler says it is today.
Exactly, which goes back to the plural darknesses. If justice is whatever the king says, and tomorrow the king wakes up and changes his mind, then justice changes.
There is no standard.
None. You are stumbling in the dark because the floor keeps moving under your feet.
It creates total instability. But then you have the second face, which the sources are surprisingly critical of. They call it
Priestcraft. That is a heavily loaded
It
word.
sounds like something out of a fantasy novel. But the critique here is biting.
It really is. The sources describe this as religious elitism. But I want to broaden this a bit, because in our modern context, priestcraft isn't just about guys in robes standing at an altar.
What else is it?
It's about any intellectual elite that claims to hold the keys to truth and demands blind obedience.
Oh, that's incredibly interesting. So it could be religious leaders, sure, but it could also be say, academic elites or media figures who say, we are the experts. Don't question us. Just believe what we tell you.
Precisely. The core mechanism is exactly the same. The source describes it as leaders inventing dogmas, rituals, or constraints, and then falsely attributing them to a higher power.
Whether that higher power is God or science or history with a capital H.
Exactly. They say this is the absolute ultimate truth, when really it's just a control mechanism they invented to keep their own positions secure.
So it's using the authority of the divine, or the absolute, to enforce purely human control.
Yes. And the sources argue that this is actually a primary form of Takhut because it paralyzes people spiritually and intellectually. It creates a barrier between the human mind and the actual truth.
Which leads us to the psychological impact of living under this kind of system. Because if you have the political face crushing you physically and the intellectual face confusing you mentally, what does that do to your brain?
It creates a state of constant terror.
There was this specific analogy in the text about a dark room and a rope that I thought was just perfect for explaining this psychology.
It's the analogy of the rope and the snake. It's a classic for a reason.
Walk us through it. For you listening, picture this.
Imagine you are locked in a pitch-black room. You cannot see your hand in front of your face. You are shuffling around, terrified, and suddenly your bare foot touches something on the floor. It's long, it's cylindrical, and it's coiled.
Immediate panic. My brain instantly says, snake.
Right. In the darkness, your mind fills in the gaps with fear. You think it's a cobra. Your heart rate spikes, you pump adrenaline, you freeze, or maybe you lash out and try to stomp on it.
The fear you feel in that moment is 100% real. The physiological reaction is real.
But the danger isn't.
The danger is a total fiction.
It's just a piece of rope. But here is the profound point the source makes. Oppressive systems, Takhut, rely on keeping the lights off. They rely on that darkness.
Why?
Because as long as the people are in the dark, they will constantly mistake ropes for snakes. They will be terrified of things that absolutely cannot hurt them.
They'll be afraid of their neighbors. They'll be afraid of foreign ideas. They'll be afraid of losing their tradition. They're just constantly jumping at shadows.
And a population that is terrified is very easy to control. A frightened person looks for a protector. They look for a pharaoh. They say, please save me from the snake.
And the pharaoh says, I will save you, but you have to do exactly what I say.
But
if you turn on the light, the rope is just a rope. The light doesn't change the rope, doesn't magically turn a snake into a piece of hemp. It just reveals reality.
And the moment you see the reality, the fear dissolves. You don't need a protector anymore. You just pick up the rope and move it out of the way.
That is so powerful. Enlightenment, true knowledge, is an existential threat to tyranny because it kills the fear that the tyrant depends on to survive.
Exactly. And that is why the system works so incredibly hard to crush the light, which brings us to the actual mechanism of that crushing.
Right, because the sources don't just say, tyrants are bad. They give us a breakdown of the team. Because tyranny is never a one-man show.
It never is. You need an alliance.
The unholy alliance. This is where the text gets almost conspiratorial, but in a way that completely aligns with history. It claims you need a corrupt triad to really control a population. You need three specific archetypes working together.
Yes, and the sources use three figures from history, specifically from the story of Moses, to represent these universal forces. It's like a cast of characters for oppression.
Let's meet the cast. First up, the big boss, Pharaoh.
Pharaoh represents political dictatorship. This is the archetype of brute force, autocracy, and political subjugation. Pharaoh is the one who says, I am your Lord, Most High. He holds the stick. He controls the police, the army, the prisons.
He is the physical threat. Obey me or I will hurt you.
Correct. But history shows us that brute force alone is exhausting. You can't stand over every single person with a whip 24/7. It's completely inefficient.
You'd run out of guards.
Exactly. You need the people to police themselves. You need them to believe that obeying you is actually the right thing to do.
Enter the second character, Haman. Now, in the source narrative, Haman is the minister, the advisor to Pharaoh. But as an archetype, he represents religious manipulation or the priesthood.
And again, let's broaden this to intellectual enablers, the spin doctors, the propagandists, the court philosophers. Their entire job is to use dogma, tradition, and intellectual arguments to justify the tyrant. When Pharaoh wants to build a useless, massive monument that will kill thousands of slaves, he can't just say, I want this because I'm vain.
No, because that causes a riot.
Right. So Haman steps in and says to the people, the gods demand this monument. If we don't build it, the sun won't rise. Your suffering is actually a holy sacrifice.
That is so insidious. So Pharaoh breaks your legs, but Haman tells you it's for your own spiritual good, or that you are sinful and you deserve to have your legs broken.
It is pure psychological warfare. Haman intoxicates the mind so it doesn't question the pharaoh's fist. The source text actually uses the word here.
Intoxication.
It says that empty religious rituals and dogmas act as drugs.
Like the opium of the masses.
A very similar concept, yes. Haman keeps the people drunk on superstition or distracted by trivial, endless debates so they never look up and ask, wait, why are we slaves?
But there is a third character in this triad. And honestly, this one feels the most modern of all. The money man.
Karun. The sources are not subtle about him at all. Karun represents economic exploitation. He represents the blood-sucking capitalist system, and that is the source's term, not mine.
Blood-sucking. They went straight for the vampire metaphor.
They really did. Karun represents the extreme concentration of wealth. He represents the oligarchy. And in this alliance, his role is absolutely crucial. While Pharaoh holds the sword and Haman holds the microphone, Karun holds
the bread.
This is the tactic of economic dependency. Think about it. If you want to control a population completely, you can't just scare them or lie to them. You have to make them dependent on you for their literal survival.
So I rebel. I don't just risk going to jail. I risk my job. I risk my kids going hungry.
Exactly. The source notes that if people are starving or if they're living paycheck to paycheck, terrified of losing their livelihood, they simply cannot revolt.
They don't have the mental bandwidth for a revolution.
Their entire brain is focused on one question. How do I eat today? How do I pay rent tomorrow?
It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs completely weaponized against the public. You keep the population stuck at the very bottom rung, physiological survival, so they never have the energy to reach the top rung, which is self-actualization or liberty.
Precisely. It is a beautifully terrible system. Pharaoh keeps you afraid of death. Haman keeps you confused about reality. And Karun keeps you hungry. It is a triad of control that targets the body, the mind, and the stomach all at once.
And the result is a population that is totally locked down. And here is where the deep dive gets a little darker. The sources say that if you live under this system for too long, it doesn't just suppress you, it changes you.
This is the most disturbing part of the analysis for me, honestly. It's the concept of the atrophy of intellect.
Because we tend to think of oppression as something external. I am here, the walls are there. If the walls fall down, I am free. But the sources argue that the walls eventually migrate inside your head.
They do. The sources argue that target systems treat the human intellect as a forbidden tree. They effectively say, you can do anything you want, but you cannot think. They demand blind imitation.
Don't ask questions, just do what your father did. Just do what the TV says.
Right. And here, the sources invoke a biological law. It's the law of use it or lose it. Just like a muscle. If you lie in bed for 6 months, your leg muscles will atrophy. You won't be able to walk when you finally stand up. The source argues that the intellect is an organ. It is a faculty.
So if you don't use it,
if a society stops using its critical thinking skills, if generation after generation is told, don't look, don't question, that faculty physically and spiritually withers away.
And to illustrate this, the text gives us a metaphor that is straight out of a horror movie.
Bat.
Explain the bat theory for us.
So the source argues metaphorically that bats were not always blind, but they chose a lifestyle of darkness. They retreated into caves. They actively avoided the sun. And because they stopped using their eyes, nature eventually said, well, you clearly don't need these, and took their sight away.
It's evolutionary efficiency. Why power an eye you never use?
Exactly. But now apply that to a human society. If a nation wears the blindfold of imitation for centuries, they become deaf, dumb, and blind in a spiritual sense. They lose the capacity to perceive truth. They navigate only by
echoes. Like echolocation. That is actually a really deep layer to the metaphor. If you're a bat, you don't see the world as it actually is. You only hear the sound of your own voice bouncing back at you.
That is the definition of an echo chamber. That is the definition of a society that only listens to its own biases. But here's the kicker. What happens when you take a bat, a creature that has adapted entirely to total darkness, and you throw it into the sunlight?
It doesn't say, oh, wow, look at the beautiful view.
No, it screams, it flaps wildly, it is in acute distress, it is in pain.
Because
the light hurts, and this is a profound psychological insight. When a society is deep in intellectual darkness, when they have been under the thumb of Pharaoh and Haman for centuries, they don't welcome the truth.
Even if it's meant to save them?
Even then. When the light appears, whether that's a new idea, a call for justice, or a divine revelation, they react with violence.
They don't attack the light because they think it's false. They attack it because it causes them physical and mental pain.
It creates a cognitive dissonance that is agonizing. They have lost the organ required to process the light, so their immediate reaction is to destroy the light source so they can go back to the comfort of the darkness.
That explains so much. It explains why people get so inexplicably angry when you challenge a tradition that is clearly harmful to them. It explains why mobs turn on reformers. It's the bat screaming in the sun.
It is. And that is the ultimate victory of the Takat system. It creates a prisoner who fears the open door. It creates a slave who fights against their own liberator.
That is incredibly heavy. We've painted a picture here that feels almost hopeless. We have a machine that's fundamentally broken, a triad of villains running the show, and a population of bats who hate the light. If I'm listening right now, I'm thinking, thanks, guys. I'm going to go stare at a blank wall for 3 hours.
Sounds bleak.
But the sources don't stop there. They offer a remedy.
They do, and the remedy is surprisingly nuanced. It's not just believe harder, and it's not just read more books. It's about the relationship between two specific things, the eye and the sun.
The eye and the sun. Let's break this down. In this analogy, the eye is the human intellect, right?
Yes, the eye is reason. The sources are very clear on this. They praise the intellect highly. They say it is the distinguishing feature of humanity. It is the tool we were given to navigate the world.
So the sources are not anti-intellectual. They aren't saying shut off your brain and just have blind faith.
Far from it. They are saying use your brain. However, they point out a very real functional limitation. An eye, no matter how perfect you could have 20/20 vision, no cataracts, a perfect retina if you place that eye in a sealed room with absolute zero photons. It is blind. The eye is the instrument of sight, but it is not the source of light. It needs an external medium to function properly.
And that external medium is the sun.
And in this worldview, the sun is divine revelation. It is the universal principles given by the Creator.
So the argument is for a synergy. You need the internal tool, which is the eye, and the external light, which is the sun. If you have the sun, but you close your eyes, meaning you have revelation, but you refuse to think you are the bat, you are in darkness.
That is blind imitation. That's the Haman trap we talked about earlier.
And this is the controversial part for a lot of modern listeners. What if you have the eye, but no sun? What if you rely on pure, secular human reason without any higher moral guidance?
The source argues that this leads to a different kind of darkness. It argues that unguided reason is inherently
Selfish. I think of reason as objective. Spock isn't selfish, he's just logical.
But logic always serves a goal. If my goal is survival of the fittest, or maximum profit, then logic dictates that I should exploit you. If I am stronger than you and I can take your land and your resources to make my life better, reason says, do it.
That's cold, but it is rational. If there is no higher moral law saying, thou shalt not steal, then stealing is just a highly effective resource transfer strategy.
Exactly. And when you scale that up to the level of a nation, the source argues that a nation's collective reason, unguided by universal principles, prioritizes national interest.
And national interest is often just a polite euphemism for imperialism.
It is logical for us to invade this country because we need their oil.
It is logical for us to enslave this population because it boosts our GDP.
That is the unguided eye. It sees, but it sees like a predator. It sees prey. The source calls this the blood-sucking nature of purely materialist rationalism.
So the argument is that divine revelation acts as the sun because it provides universal standards.
Yes. The light of revelation is objective and universal. It says justice is justice, whether it helps you or hurts you. It says all human beings have dignity, not just the ones in your particular tribe.
It overrides local selfishness.
It protects the weak from the logic of the strong.
So the solution is this two-winged approach. You need the wing of intellect and the wing of revelation.
If you try to fly with only one wing, you crash. If you have only intellect, you become a predator, like Karun. If you have only blind faith, you become prey, like the bat. You absolutely need both to soar.
That's the theory, and it is a beautiful theory. But let's talk about the reality on the ground. Let's go back to the dry bones. Because a lot of listeners might look at their society or the state of the world right now and say, it's too late. We are already dead. The corruption is too deep.
The sources address this despair directly. They know that when you realize the true extent of the darkness, the natural reaction is hopelessness. So they recount a parable. The vision of the valley of dry bones.
This is the Ezekiel story.
Yes, referenced here as a vision of a prophet. It's a very cinematic scene. The prophet is standing in a valley, the sun is beating down, and the valley is filled not with bodies, but with bones.
Bleached, brittle, scattered bones.
This isn't a fresh battlefield. This is a graveyard that has been abandoned for a century.
So the implication is that life has been gone for a very long time. There's no structure left. The society has completely disintegrated.
And the question is posed to the prophet. Can these bones live?
And rationally, using just the eye, the answer is no. Dust doesn't turn back into men.
But the parable says yes. However, and this is the critical part, it describes a process. It doesn't happen with a magical snap of the fingers.
It takes time.
The text mentions a timeline. In some interpretations, 100 years. It describes the bones shaking, rattling, coming together, bone to bone, then sinew, then flesh, then skin, and finally, breath.
It's a massive reconstruction project. It's not magic.
It is work. And the source text adds another layer to this using a biological metaphor, the embryo.
From skeletons to embryos, what is the connection there?
The source asks us to look at the humble drop that becomes a human being, a microscopic cell. It looks like absolutely nothing, but it has two critical things: latent capacity and nourishment.
Latent capacity and nourishment. Break that down.
The cell has the code for life inside it. That is the capacity. And the womb provides the environment and the food. That is the nourishment. If those two meet, growth is inevitable.
So applying this to a quote-unquote dead nation.
The latent capacity is the seed of desire in the people. Even in the darkest tyranny, even in a nation of bats, is there a small group or a quiet feeling in the hearts of the many that actually wants dignity, that wants truth?
That's the seed. Ghost in the shell, so to speak.
Right, and the nourishment, that is the divine law, that is the light. The source argues that if you can connect that tiny latent seed of desire with the nourishment of universal principles, rebirth isn't just possible, it is a biological inevitability.
That is a profoundly hopeful formula. Desire plus truth equals rebirth. It doesn't matter how dry the bones are, it doesn't matter how powerful the pharaoh is. If you have those two ingredients, the skeleton will reassemble.
It might take 100 years. We might be the generation that just connects the ankle bone to the shin bone. We might never see the face, but the process has started.
And that puts the responsibility right back on us. We aren't just passive observers. We are the bone builders. We're the ones who have to choose to open our eyes.
We have to choose to stop being bats. We have to choose to tolerate the pain of the light until our eyes adjust.
So let's bring this all together.
Yeah.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started with the grammar of light versus darknesses. We looked at the machine of justice and how we break it.
We met the unholy alliance.
Right. Pharaoh, Haman, and Karun. The triad that stars our bodies and drugs our minds. We looked at the horror of the bat society. And finally, we found the remedy in the synergy of the eye and the sun.
It is a complete diagnosis of the human condition.
It really is. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that religion or spirituality in this context isn't about escaping the world. It's not about sitting on a mountain and meditating while the world burns down around you.
Not at all.
It's about engaging. It's about being the engineer who puts the piston back in the right place.
Exactly. It demands that you be smart. It demands that you be critical. If you aren't thinking, you aren't actually following the light. You are just finding a comfortable corner of the dark.
So here's the final provocative thought for you, the listener. We talked a lot about the bat today. We talked about how it screams when the light hits it.
It is a haunting image.
It is. So I want you to monitor yourself this week. The next time you hear an idea that challenges your worldview, the next time you hear a fact that contradicts your political tribe.
Pay attention to your reaction.
Yes. The next time you feel that sudden spike of anger or fear or that urge to just shut it out and close the tab.
Ask yourself, why am I angry? Is it because this idea is actually a snake? Is it because it's genuinely dangerous?
Or is it just possible that you were the bat? Is it possible that the light is hurting you simply because you have been in the dark for too long?
That is a terrifying question to ask yourself, but asking it is the very first step to getting your sight back.
Check your vision, everyone. Don't be afraid of the sun. We will see you on the next deep dive.
Stay illuminated.